Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel where today we are going to do a full-length, non-spoilery review of Caliban's War by James S.A. Corey, the second book in the Expanse series. So, the Expanse series is an adult science fiction series, and it is obviously set in the future, and we have not only colonized Mars, but we have also colonized little bits and pieces of the outer planets. The storyline of this particular series is a little bit hard to sum up, partially because it is very big, very epic, and part of it is because I have only read 2 books, so I don't exactly know where we are going with this. And even honestly, the description of this book is a little bit hard to get into without spoilers of the first book, but the very vague description that I can give you is that there are uh, a larger cast of characters, and one group is trying to track down a missing girl, and the other group is trying to avoid an alien invasion and try to figure out if maybe they've actually already been invaded. And the story goes from there. So let's go ahead and jump right in and talk about the world building. So as you would expect from the second book in a series, we are taking the world building we did in the first book and building more on it. In the first book, we really focused on the outer planets and the outer planets alliance, which was a group of people trying to consolidate the power of the outer planets to try to become something that could rival the governments of Earth and Mars. In this book, we are actually pivoting away from that. We are still getting some amount of world building about the ships and like how the various planets and moons are have been colonized and what their place is in the solar system. But for the most part, we are actually focusing much more on the politics of Earth. So what a little bit of the governmental structure of Earth, as well as like their relations with Mars, as well as what they're trying to figure out what to do about this outer planet alliance, this little upstart government power that now they have to kind of deal with. And I found all of this political stuff to be actually very interesting. I definitely wanted more because I was left a little bit confused about the structure, but that's mostly just because like I really like to understand the entire system of things, but we did get enough for the story, so it wasn't a big deal. And I did find it very interesting. The other major world building thing I wanted to talk about was the science. This is a hard science fiction, but it is written in a way that you do not actually have to understand the science, which I very much appreciate. So this is very clearly a world that took science as the foundation and built out from there. Obviously, it's fictional, but it is very much based in the science. And then as we are reading the story, it is definitely, there is science in it, but it's much more about adding a little bit of flavor for the people that do enjoy science in their stories. You're not going to get long passages of people waxing poetic about how this piece of technology works. You're just not going to get it, which I just generally appreciate because I don't always understand the science, especially in the first book when it was so physics heavy. I did struggle. This one isn't as bad, probably because there's less physics, but like I didn't always understand the botany either. And I found that it didn't actually matter in the grand scheme of this story. So I very, very much appreciate that. So overall, I do think that the world building is not super in-depth, but very solid and very interesting. So next up, let's talk about the characters. So there are a lot of them. We have a group of holdover characters from the first book, and then we are adding in some new ones as well. So let's first talk about those holdovers. So I will say that, like the first book, I do think the characters are probably the weakest part of this book. And part of it is because we don't ever have any kind of depth to the characterization of basically anybody. We got a little bit more background on some of the crew members. Thankfully, one of our main characters, James Holden, is not quite so one note as he was in the first book, but like I don't really feel like they are well-rounded characters. And in addition, our one female holdover character, which is Naomi, didn't really have almost any additional information about her. And a lot of the actions that she took in this book really seemed to be much more in service of Holden's storyline, which I just generally did not appreciate. I was just disappointed. I really wanted more for Naomi. I am so curious about her, and I'm just not getting it. And now let's talk about the new characters. So we added in a scientist character by the name of Prax, he's a botanist, and I thought that was interesting. I was very excited to see a scientist character. I noted in my review of Leviathan Wakes, the first book, that I was a little surprised there wasn't a scientist character, and so now we have it. And unfortunately, I just did not connect with him at all. I do think that he added a really nice dynamic to the group, and I really appreciated how he kind of would take conversations in a different direction. I just generally liked the addition of a scientist type character. I just didn't connect with him specifically. And then the other two characters are Christian Avasarala, who works in the government of Earth, and then Gunnery Sergeant Bobby Draper, who is a Martian Marine. And they're much more on the political side of things and dealing with this possible alien invasion. And I found their characters to be mostly interesting. So what I'm finding, at least at this point in the series, a whole 2 books in, is that it feels like the authors came up with like a snappy description for each character, and then the characters never kind of get out of that description. They're just always that thing. So for example, Avasarala, it feels like a grandma-aged politician with a foul mouth. And like that's the description, and she's never really anything more than that. So it doesn't feel like well-rounded characters. They are good enough for the story that's being told. It is not super, like when you're reading, it's not super noticeable that you don't have super like deep characterizations of these people. It's just like when I pull back, I notice it, and I am disappointed with it. The other thing that I will mention is that Bobby Draper is a big woman. She is both tall and wide, and enough to make people comment on her size. And it is very understandable that people would comment on her size when they first meet her, and then also later when she is trying to use equipment that is sized for somebody much smaller than her. Those all make sense. But the narration had a lot more commentary about her size. And it wasn't like fat phobic so much. It was just like constantly commenting on how big Sergeant Draper is. And it got to the point where, for me, it crossed the line into othering. And so I did not appreciate that either. Now, I will say I am I am a little sensitive to it because I am a taller female person. And so, like, I understand that when you constantly get comments about how different you are than the ideal, that it can get, first of all, annoying, but also it can be very othering depending on how the person is doing it. And so, like, I know that I am a little sensitive to it, so your mileage may vary. It may not bother you at all. But I do think it crossed that line, and I just generally did not appreciate it. Next up, let's talk about the plot. So again, this is very difficult to talk about because I don't want to spoil for anybody. But this plot, even though it feels like it might be an independent plot, it is much more about pushing the overarching story forward. It's very much a series in that way, which I don't mind at all. But what I am finding is that overarching plot, I find it interesting, but I don't find it compelling. So I like the stories. I very much enjoy it. I enjoy reading it. I do want to know what happens next, but if I never find out what happens next, I'm not going to be hugely put out. So that's what I mean about compelling. Like, I like it, but it's not compelling. What I do find compelling is how the story is being told. So, we're going to talk a little bit about the structure with this as well, like the structure of this book. So, this book has 4 different perspectives, and at the beginning of the book, we are following the 4 different people who are completely separate from each other. Eventually, 2 of them meet up. That is Holden and Prax, and they go searching for the missing girl. And then we have Avasarala and Draper, and they meet up and they kind of deal with this possible alien situation. And it works really, really well to do it that way because the authors managed to find 2 sets of people who have very different perspectives on the events. And those are the perspectives we have. And so it's just really interesting to watch it. But then at the end, everybody kind of comes together. And now we've got 4 different perspectives moving this story forward. And I don't think it was necessary in any way. I don't think it was necessary to do that. But to keep it on the plot, because we had those different perspectives and they actually did add to the story, I did really enjoy kind of finding this, like watching this story unfold. Now, the first book had a much more layered storytelling approach to it, in that we would have the layer of the story, find out a lot about that particular layer, and then eventually pull it back and then take a look at the next layer. This one still has some amount of layers, but it's more straightforward. It's interesting with the twists and turns, but it isn't quite, it's a little bit easier to see where we might be headed. And even though it wasn't quite as layered, I still really, really enjoyed it. And again, with the addition of these different perspectives that had something to add, that weren't just different perspectives to be different perspectives, I think that the storytelling of this was done really well. And this is where I do think that this is the strong point of the books in this series that I've read so far. So, talking about that multiple POV. So I did start to say this, but I really liked having the 2 perspectives for the 2 different groups in the middle, but having all 4 perspectives in different places in the beginning and all 4 perspectives in the same place at the end didn't feel quite right to me. In the beginning, it was just a lot to like remember, and at the end it was just kind of unnecessary. So I don't know how to fix that, especially because I really appreciate having how the perspectives were done in the middle, but I didn't like it. I did not necessarily like it. So yeah, this is generally a much more fast-paced book than the first one was. The first one had a lot of action, but it was very deliberate about how it moved the story forward. This one is not quite so, I don't want to say it's not deliberate, because that doesn't, like, clearly it was everything was intentional, but it just moved a lot faster. We weren't spending quite so much time on each layer of the story. And I really, really enjoyed that part of it. I think that the writing style is very straightforward and just generally really easy to read, so I liked that as well. And obviously, overall, I just generally really enjoy this story. Again, I'm not quite at the point where I'm hooked. I don't feel compelled to pick up the next one, but I am really interested to see where this story goes, and I will pick up the next one. And hopefully, at that point, with the next one, I'll end up completely hooked on this series. But overall, I gave this book 4 stars. I enjoyed it. And if you are interested at all, I would definitely recommend picking it up. But that's all I got. So leave me a comment down below. If you have read this, if you are interested in reading this, let me know your thoughts and feelings. But that's it. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. And until next time, have happy reading, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!